Soulful Menagerie by Chocolate Castle in the Sky on AO3, read by Lily6645. No archive warnings apply. Chapter 2, Growing Pains. Summary: Soul marks, quirks, and family growing up isn't easy for anyone. By the time the boys had turned 4, Izuku had Kachan's jackal racing around his skin. They were each other's only platonic soul marks, something that made Izuku's chest swell with pride. He often watched the jackal and rabbit play, though there were times the jackal would nip at the bunny as if to warn it to stay away. Izuku understood, though. Sometimes Kachan didn't want other people around. One day on the playground, Katsuki started to pop small explosions from his palms, rendering Izuku and other classmates speechless. The green-haired boy was in awe of his friend even more, which was reflected on their skin with the bunny always following the jackal around. After all, Kachan was amazing! The thing about soul marks is that once they've gotten one, they don't go away. Katsuki's jackal became more aggressive to the rabbit that chased it, much like how the boy began to tease or yell at Izuku. It was during these times that Izuku's panther, lion, and badger would appear to confront him. No matter how happy his parental soulmates made him, Izuku wanted his friend back. The longer it took for his quirk to appear, the less involved he was with the other kids. Izuku slowly moved back and forth on the empty swing set, watching the other kids play. This time, instead of being proud of being the only platonic mark on Katsuki's skin, he thought it looked lonely. Then came the diagnosis, and with it, the vocal rejection of his peers. However, Izuku was a stubborn little boy. He continued to chase after his friend, determined to become the hero duo they talked about, determined to change the destiny placed upon him after being declared quirkless less than 48 hours after the life-altering doctor's appointment. He watched from his bedroom doorway as his father packed his bags once again and wondered where his dad's business was this time. "Hasashi, please!" Inko pleaded.
"Why should I stay? The brat doesn't have my snake on him, and he's quirkless for goodness sake."
The man's voice was filled with ire, but quiet. Both adults had assumed Izuku was sound asleep. "And what about us?" Tears dripped down the young woman's face.
"When was the last time you thought about us, Inko?"
The man's voice sounded hollow.
"I can count how many times we've had a night to ourselves since the kid was born. I tried to ignore the fact you've been distant since the boy is distant. I tried to justify when we haven't had a date in nearly 2 years."
He ran his hand through his disheveled hair.
"I'm tired, Inko. This diagnosis will only cause problems, and I don't have the energy to deal with them."
"But—" He cuts her off.
"I'll send you child support, and I will miss you, Inko."
He paused, continuing with a murmur.
"I have for the last few years."
These were Izuku's father's parting words, not sparing one goodbye for the kid. Inko, who had stared after her leaving husband, had turned from the facing the front door and caught sight of her wide-eyed child. "Oh, Izuku!" She rushed forward and cradled him in her arms. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Izuku was silent, watching as the snake that often coiled itself around his mother's badger isolated itself, slithering into spaces that others would avoid. She led him back to his bed and laid beside him, running her hands through his wild curls. She would wake in the morning with a throbbing back and a throbbing heart, but she refused to let herself feel despair. She looked into the peaceful face of her child, soft and wary, free in sleep, and resolved to give him the life he deserved. She let the minutes flow past her in a torrent stream of time, watching the rise and fall of his chest and the grip of animals clutching him, and thanking the heavens that her boy would have so many people to care for him. Inko kept Izuku home from preschool that following day. After waking up, she helped him climb a chair to mix batter for pancakes. The radio blasted an upbeat song, and Izuku wiggled along to it, careful not to fall off the chair. Inko let out a twinkling laugh and dabbed some butter to the freckled nose. "Mama!" He squealed and scrunched his face up tight, rubbing at his nose to remove the offending batter. The day was bright and somewhat chilly, the epitome of a pleasant November day. Izuku accompanied his mother while she ran errands. He cheerfully greeted the shopkeepers and cashiers at the stores they stopped in, leaving smiles in his wake. It was nearing lunchtime, and Izuku was sucking on the lollipop the person at the post office gave him, lost in his own head and muttering about the many quirks he had seen. He stumbled, nearly falling into traffic, if it weren't for a strong hand with quick reflexes.
Are you okay?
A dark-haired stranger asked the boy, who nodded solemnly.
That's good. Be careful, okay?
Nodding again, Izuku grabbed his mother's hand, who thanked the young adult profusely, much to his chagrin. Izuku lamented the loss of his candy, but it was soon out of mind as his mother tugged him along to the cafe. Yagi strolled down the street on his way to visit his alma mater for a guest talk. The people parted before him on the crowded street, some in admiration of his position as number one hero, others in intimidation of his large stature. He passed by a cafe, not noticing the tiny green child vibrating at the window, pointing adamantly and gawking at his passing. The blonde had considered allowing himself to blend into the crowd. While he was still extraordinarily tall outside of his All Might persona, his muscles looked far more natural, toned instead of bulky. Yet he knew that appearing here and there, broad shoulders and hulking, was a deterrent for criminals. Even rumors of him in the area would help quell nefarious behavior for a little while. A confirmed sighting would have an even more significant impact. He good-naturedly walked and greeted those brave enough to approach him. A crowd flocked to his presence, clogging the sidewalk with civilians and slowing foot traffic. All the while he smiled and waved whilst reviewing his speech in his head, the faces all blurred together around him. After so many years in the spotlight, he was able to project his persona perfectly on the outside while the inside pulsed with an array of thoughts. Shota was on his way to lunch with Hazashi when a small child nearly fell into oncoming traffic. Before he could process what he was doing, his hand was gripping the boy's arm and stabilizing him. Wide Viridian eyes stared up at him, and he crouched down. "Are you okay?" He spoke softly, trying not to frighten the child. At the boy's nod, he let out a relieved sigh. "That's good. Be careful, okay?" The shy boy grabbed a woman's hand. The woman was teary-eyed as she repeatedly thanked him. "We were just on our way to the cafe down the street. If you would like, I would love to buy you a coffee or something to thank you." Shota awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a bit naked without his captured weapon. "It's all right. I'm on my way to lunch now, anyway." It took several more platitudes before he was able to escape through the incredibly crowded street. Hazashi, when he told why exactly he had been running late, thought he was hysterical and sweet. Still, through the laughing and teasing, the blonde's eyes shone with admiration and love. Shota sipped at his coffee as the blonde settled down. The life-giving fuel spread warmth through his body. He allowed himself to close his eyes and take in the moment, focusing on the sweet scent that soothed his soul and the white noise of the coffee shop. His eyes fluttered open when a cool hand covered his. "What do you want to do tomorrow, babe? You never did tell me." Shota groaned. "I was hoping you'd forget." Hazashi gave an exaggerated gasp and grasped at his chest. "Me? Forget your birthday? I would never!" The blonde winked at him. "You know, Hazashi, I don't want to do anything much. It's just a birthday." Shota ignored the thought of his last birthday that pounded against the door of repressed memories. If he pretended the entire day didn't exist, then maybe things would be better. "I still want to celebrate you," the voice hero pouted. "What if we just have a date at the new cat cafe? Just us. You're turning 19. Shota rolled his eyes before huffing out in agreement, hiding a slight smile behind the rim of his cup when his soulmate beamed at him. Hazashi wouldn't let him hit rock bottom again, he thought as the vice on his heart loosened. The following day, Izuku returned to preschool so his mother could begin to look for a full-time job. She had been helping out part-time at a local convenience shop, but without Hazashi's steady paycheck, she would need something more to provide for her family of two. Inko dressed smartly, and after she dropped her son off at school and said hello to Katsuki, she rolled back her shoulders and set off, determined to have at least an interview before the day was over. Kachan waved to his aunt while he was rushed by Izuku. The little boy wanted to tell his friend all about his day off, but the blonde shoved him away. Izuku stumbled, but caught himself before he fell to the floor. The teacher shook her head at him. "Careful, Midoriya, you could get hurt!" Nothing was said to his tormentor. Nobody asked him about his day off. Many didn't even seem to notice he hadn't been there the previous day. During art time, he thought about how sad his mommy was the other night. His face settled to a determined smile. He would make her something that would make her happy, and then she wouldn't be sad anymore. He got to work with his crayons, working very hard to draw a badger and a bunny like the ones on his skin. He even had the teacher write "I love you" on it for him, since he was still learning and Kachan wouldn't help. With his masterpiece safely tucked into his bag, he rushed to try and play heroes with Kachan and the other kids. Across town, the bell above a door of Cats and Coffee jingled, announcing the presence of a rather grumpy birthday boy and his eager partner. After ordering and paying for their treats, the blonde worked to find the ravenet. His eyes scoured the room, finally landing on a cat-covered lump. He soon discovered that the lump was fast asleep, exhaustion remaining from a late patrol. Shota grumbled when several cats jumped off him. He cracked one eye open to see the smiling face of his angel, who held out a steaming mug of coffee. He accepted the peace offering, shifting to lean against the man as carefully as possible to not lose any more feline companions. He took a large sip.
Thank you.
Of course, Sho. It's called Cats and Coffee for a reason. He winked, then his boyfriend groaned at his terrible joke. Hazashi broke into a spiel about his idea for his next podcast episode and how a local radio station was willing to allow him to intern there, which could potentially lead to a job. It would be one step closer to reaching his goal of having his own radio show. Shota interjected occasionally, offering his input, suggestions, and encouragements. He was content to remain in the shadows, but he knew how much the other desired this and would support the man with everything he could. This meant that their small two-bedroom apartment had one room dedicated to the recording studio, carefully padded to reduce noise through so much of the rest of their apartment. Shota would spend hours sitting in their living room while Hazashi showed him new playlists and show topics. They remained wrapped in their own little world, only interrupted when the pieces of cake were ready to be eaten. They moved from the padded ground to a table in an attempt to reduce the likelihood of a cat catastrophe with the food. Before he could take a bite, Hazashi leaned across the table and pecked him on the lips. Happy birthday. Shota ducked his head with a blush and reluctantly accepted the bite his partner offered to feed him, embarrassment radiating off of his body. Frey watched with tears in her eyes as her eldest child stormed off, her youngest dragged into a training room, and her middle two staring wide-eyed at what they had just seen. She had worked hard to delay her husband's discovery not only of his quirk, but the parental and romantical soulmates already painted his skin. She was relieved to find her mark on all four of her children. The fact that several of her children had other parental marks was no discouragement. She knew she was a failure of a mother, but her husband, a man with nearly clear skin,
was that much worse. Her bond with him was platonic, a faint reminder of the brief time they were happy together. Ray straightened her back. Fiomi, Natsuo, dears, would you please start washing and peeling the vegetables for dinner? I'll go check on your brother. With resolve in each step, she followed the lingering scent of smoke to the barren bedroom of her eldest child. Go away! Toya? Are you really going to just let him do this? Toss us each aside when he gets his newest toy? One that finally does what he wants? Destroy another child? The 11-year-old hissed at her, venom coating in words and echoing the same thoughts that ran through her mind on the day. What kind of mother am I? I can't even help my own kids. She looked down in shame and turned tail. Izuku and his mother decided to spend his 5th birthday at a nice playground across town. Katsuki was begrudgingly present, his parents lavishing the younger boy with attention and gifts. Still, even with the new toys, Kachan refused to play with Izuku, leaving the boy to play alone near the big slide. His new King Orca figure was going up against an unnamed villain, represented by a stick he had found. Take that, you big villain! Gang Orca punched the wooden villain with a battle-ending blow. Izuku faked a deep voice. Oh no! Not a hero! The stick fell to the ground in defeat, and Izuku giggled. You're playing heroes and villains. The almost question came from a purple-haired boy his age, scrawny and bruised. Do you want to play with me? Excitement built in the green eyes that stared up at the other child. You want to play with me? Another almost question. But Izuku just barreled ahead. Of course! We can take turns being heroes! The unknown child blinked in confusion at the brilliant smile he was given. I'm Midoriya Izuku! What's your name? Shinso Hitoshi. He ungracefully sat in the shaded space and accepted the long-worn All Might figurine handed to him. I don't really know how to play. Do you like heroes? He nodded. Well, just pretend that one of us is a hero and the other is a villain, and the villain is attacking somewhere, and the hero comes in and BAM! And beats the villain to save the day. He illustrated his speech with wide arm movements. Midoriya allowed the other boy to play hero first, and the two played contentedly for over 15 minutes. Do you have a favorite hero, Shinso? He's not really well known. The boy frowned at the figure in his hand. No one believes me when I tell them about him. I'll believe you! His violet eyes met eager green ones practically in his face. He stared back a little. His name's Eraserhead. He's an underground hero. He sometimes comes into my neighborhood. That's so cool! I love All Might, but heroes are amazing! I only know of one underground one, but that's so awesome! And you got to see him in action? The embarrassed child nodded and told him about the time Eraserhead stopped a guy from robbing the convenience store across from his home. The fun between those two would have continued if Bakugo hadn't gotten frustrated that Izuku wasn't paying attention to him for so long.
He huffed as he hunted down the quirkless boy. When Izuku saw the explosive boy coming over, he started talking so fast that his companion could barely keep up. "Oh no, Kachan's coming, and he looks mad! You might want to leave before he gets here." Izuku stood and shuffled his red shoes. "I liked playing with you." "Oi, Deku! What kind of lame games are you playing?" His tone made the purple-haired boy flinch before meeting understanding eyes, turning around and running off. Kachan berated him the entire way back to their waiting parents. Katsuki turned 6 right before the boys started elementary school. Their parents wept as they took pictures of the boys in their new clothes standing outside the gate of Aldera Elementary School. The two made their way to the classroom they would be sharing. The school loomed over Izuku even as his excitement built. He was finally going to a real school. He would learn to be smart like Kachan. The desks were lined up in rows, each labeled with a name. Midoriya frowned when he saw how far away his was from his blonde classmate, but when they went syllabically, it couldn't be helped. Kachan was near the front, and Izuku was all the way in the back. He carefully hung his new backpack and took out the All Might pencil case he had picked out the previous week. He swung his legs, kicking back and forth to try to contain his excitement. He eyed his friend confidently sitting at his desk, watching the numerous students enter. There were several from their preschool, but many more joined the class that Izuku couldn't recognize. A tall, stern man entered the room. Izuku scrambled with the other kids to greet their new teacher. They followed him quietly to the orientation before returning to class to begin to get to know one another. Izuku, in his excitement to make new friends and learn about new quirks, didn't consider how others would react to him being quirkless.
Children, it's incredibly uncommon for people to be quirkless. It's because their bodies are not fully developed. People who are quirkless are weaker and less smart than the rest of us. So make sure you treat Midoriya gently. He won't be able to handle a lot of what you can.
He waited for the class to vocalize their understanding before moving forward. Some of the kids, including Bakugo, had laughed when they heard about how the quirkless are losers. Izuku shrunk in his seat, embarrassed to be the topic of mockery. Each day that week, their teacher reminded the students about how fragile Midoriya was. It seemed to be the first thing mentioned during the day, even before their Japanese lessons or math lessons. Each day, this drew decisive comments from his peers. Young brains soak up information like sponges, especially from authority figures. Their teacher had to be right. When Izuku tripped while running during gym class, he was made to sit out the rest of the time. "We shouldn't have tried to have you practice in the first place. You won't be able to keep up." He watched mortifiedly as his classmates played games that looked like fun, but he was told he needed to stay where he was and practice his writing, since it would take him longer to learn it than it would the other kids. This first week set the precedence for his elementary school career. Izuku began dreading school. As excited as he had been, he was devastated. He loved to learn. He spent most of his time on his computer learning more and more about heroes. His writing and reading abilities increased through his decision to analyze heroes and their quirks, but his teachers refused to give him assignments that were as challenging as his peers and laughed coldly at him when he asked for something more difficult. His spirits lowered each day he attended, trudging to school each morning and slumping home each afternoon. Inko had no idea how bad things were for her son. With him in school, she was able to take classes herself and was on her way to become a CNA. Her evenings with her boy consisted of cooking dinner, reading with him a little, or watching TV, putting him to bed, and doing homework before passing out herself. She pushed herself, taking more classes at once than recommended, relying on Hazashi's income to pay for her apartment and groceries. When he learned of her desire to go back to school to get a better job, he willingly increased his monthly support payments and encouraged her to follow her heart in the matter. Still, each night she caressed her son's curls, guilt swirling around her gut. Izuku discovered hero forums when he was nearly 7. He already relied on the internet to keep up with his classmates since his teachers refused to believe he was capable of more than the average 4-year-old. His typing skills were far beyond that of his peers, though his writing lagged behind. It was difficult to learn his hiragana and katakana from the internet and make sure that he wasn't making mistakes with the figures. His mother helped when she could, and when he had to stay with Kachan on occasion, Auntie and Uncle would help him, and he could sneak through Kachan's old work. Still, lurking on the hero forums helped increase his vocabulary extensively. He had his mom help him make an account. Mighty Boy Green. He didn't post a lot, but would occasionally ask questions of the other members. He discovered that they were a wealth of information and began to befriend a few users. Those forums were also where he learned about forums for the quirkless, an area of the web he quickly migrated to. Without those forums, he might not have managed to make it through his first years of elementary school. Hitoshi was a brilliant child. Even from infancy, his mental abilities outpaced others. He theorized it was because he had a mental quirk. That was also probably why he had an untamable mane of hair, according to his mother. His mother was his hero. She could make him smile and laugh at any time and would always sing or read to him. Mama didn't talk about it, but she was originally going to be a singer. Her quirk allowed her to relax people by singing, but then she got pregnant and devoted all her time to him. They shared a room in a 2-bedroom apartment. An old woman named Miku lived in the other. They didn't have much. Hitoshi knew they were poor. They could fit all their combined belongings into a suitcase and backpack. His mama always worked. She barely made enough to get by, but she was saving for Hitoshi's future. The two frequented the library when they could, and when she was busy, he would find playgrounds to explore. He met a kind boy at one playground shortly after his 5th birthday. His mama had gotten him a cupcake and stuffed cat, Black, and she had made it a little scarf and goggles. They dubbed it a racer cat, after one of the few heroes that patrolled their neighborhood. It was his prized possession. Hitoshi was 6 when his life fell apart. His kind, loving mother was killed in a villain attack at work. It was late and he should have been asleep, but even at his young age, he was plagued by insomnia. He heard Miku answer a knock on the door, heard the police officers break the news, and heard them tell her that a social worker would come and get him in the morning. He heard them talk about him in a detached manner. They discussed his quirk in low voices, hushed fears. Miku told them about Hitoshi's father, a music producer with a charm quirk, who seduced and dropped a teenage girl. He heard them mention a foster that specialized in difficult quirks, which he knew was the polite way to say villainous. One asked if they already owned a muzzle, and Hitoshi made up his mind. Heart pounding and tears streaming down his face, the child got to work as quickly as possible. He crept around the room, gathering his clothes as well as his mother's to pack into her suitcase. He carefully removed drawings and pictures from the wall to stash in the photo album his mother had of the two of them. The boy worked quickly and efficiently to add his pillow and sleeping bag to the luggage. When he was positive his neighbor was asleep, he slunk to the shared bathroom to get his soap, shampoo, toothbrush, toothpaste, and his mom's perfume. He filled his backpack with as much of their food as he could, leaving anything perishable. Hitoshi glanced around the empty room, the only home he could remember, before silently shutting the door. He pulled on his coat and shoes, slipping out the front door to begin his new life. Dawn was barely breaking over the trees and rooftops. Around 2 years before he was born, a neighborhood that separated the good side of town from the bad was nearly demolished in a fight. The villain had some sort of acid quirk, and most of the homes were damaged by it. Those that weren't had been subjected to the wind from the hero blowing out windows and uprooting smaller trees. It had been abandoned since. Aside from the occasional squatters, police would chase them out every week or so, protecting the divide of the city equality. It was this neighborhood he was walking to. Unstable as it may be, it was shelter and relatively safe. The liminal status of this space deterred the worst of criminals. Hitoshi walked deep into the area before selecting a relatively put together building that seemed empty of other squatters. He made his way to a small room on the second floor that overlooked the front. He let himself relax at least, unrolled his sleeping bag, and slept through the late morning and early afternoon. He woke to a thud and curse from down the hall and crept to peek out the door. He wasn't afraid to share the building if the other person was okay, and he wasn't afraid to use his quirk to make a bad person leave. Shota stumbled into his apartment, fumbling with the lights and removing his boots. He winced with each movement, pain radiating from the wound in his side. He pulled himself to the kitchen so he could grab the first aid kit stored there and a bottle of sake. After a night like he had experienced, it was the closest thing to comfort he could manage. He hissed while he cleaned the wound, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his soulmate's sound in his head that he should have accepted the offer of a ride to the hospital. He begrudgingly got off the couch and dropped his blood-stained costume into the laundry basket, specifically designated for their work clothes. He sat on the edge of their bed, sake in hand, and dropped his head to his chest. He took a deep, shuddering breath while his eyes burned with the urge to cry. He knew going into heroics, especially underground heroics, that he would see some horrific things. Knowing that and witnessing that were two separate things. A hollow darkness spread through his body, a familiar nemesis revisiting. His reddened eyes took in his partner, comforting his 3 soul children. He cursed.
How am I supposed to take care of them? I can barely take care of myself.
He scoffed and scooted back on the bed, sinking into cold blankets.
When was the last time Hisashi was home?
The dark-haired man was proud of his soulmate for finally getting his radio station up and going, but between that and their opposite patrol schedules, they hadn't seen one another for more than a few minutes at a time in what felt like ages. The bitter feeling fueled the darkness within him. He continued to watch his soul marks, but it didn't take long for his eyes to settle on a frozen cardinal. Ice spread through his chest. He wasn't fast enough then, and he wasn't fast enough now. He drained the bottle he had brought to bed with him and laughed cynically. In what universe was he capable of being a good soulmate to as many as graced his skin? He failed once already. The disastrous thoughts swirled around his head like a tornado, leaving disastrous damage in its wake and ripping open repressed memories. He fell asleep to the chants of his childhood. Villain, useless, waste of space, undeserving, unworthy, unwanted, unwanted, unwanted. Hisashi returned in the dawning hours of the day. His heart was light, filled with delight at discussions with his callers and the ability to play his favorite songs all through the night. It was exhausting and fulfilling, and he wondered if he would ever not feel exhilarated at the end of a shift. His drooping eyes took in the open first aid kit, blood, droplets, an empty sake bottle in the living room, and his smile vanished. Oh, Sho! His heart dropped further when he saw the man lying in their bed in a restless sleep. The blonde changed and climbed next to his soulmate, kissing his forehead and murmuring reassurances. Yagi internally groaned at the banquet he attended, an Oscar more suited to the celebrities that graced the red carpet than heroes who wanted to get work done. Still, with the rising conflict between the two occupations, he was forced to give his signature smile at the myriad of flashing cameras. He towered over most of the attendees, making it nearly impossible to fade into the crowd, even if his status as the number one hero allowed it. Finally, inside the venue, he slowly made his way to the buffet of snacks laid out for the pre-dinner socializing. It seemed with each step he took, a new person appeared at his side to talk. There were some he knew from various events and fundraisers. Others he knew from their involvement in the hero industry, and others he did not know but pretended to. Every person in that room was influential in some capacity. Regardless of his status as All Might, he needed to avoid alienating them. Yagi couldn't help but smile at the polite little kids that were trying to get snacks ahead of him. The eldest, a teen with red spikes streaking her white hair, was assisting the four children with her in reaching the snacks that were just too far for their tiny arms. His eyes crinkled.
Hello there! Would you like some help?
You're All Might! The words were soft as they flowed from the demure girl whose head barely topped the table.
I am, and what is your name?
I'm Yarozu Momo. She curtsied, dark hair bouncing with each movement. This is Ida Tenya. She gestured at the dark-haired boy by her side.
It's wonderful to meet you two.
He turned to smile at the three remaining children, carefully making his shock at the large scar covering the side of the youngest's face.
And who are you?
I'm Todoroki Natsuo. This is my big sister Fuyumi and my baby brother Shoto. The speaker was a sturdy-built young man, possibly in middle school as far as the blonde could tell.
Ah, you must be Enji's kids then. I thought there was 4. My eldest has recently been through a training accident.
A cold voice accompanied the excessive heat of the number 2 hero.
These 3 had best be getting back to their table.
Yagi took in the resigned look on the girl's face, the hateful look in the middle child's eyes, and the numbness that radiated off of the youngest.
Well, it was lovely to meet your children.
He boomed with a smile at his rival.
We should catch up at some point tonight.
He grinned and was met with a scowl. The Todoroki family left without another word. That wasn't very polite, the young boy stated with a frown. Yagi turned to him.
No, young Ida, it wasn't. However, sometimes people have bad days. Even heroes. Maybe he was cranky from not getting a nap.
Yarozu giggled at his comment, but Ida did not look impressed in the slightest.
Do you two need any help getting anything else from the table?
No, thank you, sir. The two collected their plates, adding a few more cookies to them, and headed off to join their families. Yagi sighed. He would rather be talking with the children than many of the adults that attended events like this. He made himself a hefty plate of snacks and worked on finding his own seating placement. It would be a long evening. Hitoshi watched as a clearly drunk teen, covered in bruises, stumbled his way through the hallways. He tried to discreetly close the door, but instead made eye contact. Both of their eyes were widened in shock as the two froze. "Kid!" Hitoshi squawked. The teen rolled his eyes and followed him into the room, letting the kid see the extensive bruises covering his skin. Hitoshi resisted the urge to cower.
Who are you?
I could ask you the same. He pretended to be full of confidence. The man snorted.
You've got sass. Seriously, kid, you're like my baby brother's age. What are you doing here?
Doesn't matter, I'm here. Hitoshi was defensive and his quirk reaching to the other's head just in case.
Okay, alright. I haven't decided on my new name, so you can just find a nickname for me. My dad is a total asshole. Shit, don't use that word, kid. And I just couldn't handle things at home, so I ran. I'm almost an adult anyways.
Is he the reason why you have those burns?
Some of them.
He sighed. Why am I telling him any of this?
Kiddo, you're too young to be out here living like this. It sucks even at my age.
Better here than muzzled in a foster home. The two had settled against the wall.
Damn.
Silence settled over them like a heavy blanket. Minutes passed.
Well, not that I'm the best option, but I'll give you a few tips.
Hitoshi. The teen looked at him. My name, Hitoshi.
Alright, so first things first. The cops sweep randomly at least twice a week. All hours of the day or night. There's a spot that I keep my extra things just in case. The cops will take anything they find to attempt to push us out of here. But my spot, it's a good backup spot even for sleeping.
Why are you helping me? Excellent question.
You're practically a baby. You're like my brother, and I shouldn't have left him there. The least I could do is give you some tips.
I can't go to school anymore. Can you help me with academics? The older boy chuckled and ruffled his hair.
We'll see, brat.
Weeks passed. The older boy finally settled on a name, Dobby. This had come about during a sleepless night in the treehouse that Hitoshi had been led to. It had survived the villain attack those many years ago relatively intact. It was protected from the elements by the many trees that had blown its way, creating a hollow to the left of the tree. It wasn't large. The two could barely lay down in it together with their meager belongings. This haven, however, was difficult to find and even more difficult to climb to. Their getaway was less comfortable than the house the two would normally dwell in, but it was safer on nights like that one, when police would raid the neighborhood with foul-smelling gas and quirk-canceling cuffs. Dobby had had a good education growing up, and eventually began to tutor the eager kid. Dobby refused to let Hitoshi do anything criminal when he had ran out of food. The teen took it upon himself to acquire some. He also refused to allow the kid to spend more money than necessary. promising to take care of him while they were on their own. The two had settled into a comfortable brotherhood, becoming platonic soulmates even, when everything went up in flames. Quite literally. Maybe this area just had a penchant for villain attacks. Maybe Endeavor figured that he wouldn't have to worry about property damage fees. Regardless, Dabi carefully shuffled Hitoshi out of the house and to the wooden space behind the neighborhood while the pro-hero demolished the buildings, paying no mind to the many fleeing occupants. The villain didn't seem too terrible in Hitoshi's young mind. He looked rather porcupine-ish and seemed unstable rather than villain. But as Dobby reminded him, it wasn't up to him to make that choice. He just needed to survive. The boy now only had the treehouse as a form of shelter. The weather was turning colder as November approached. Dobby had found a tarp and nails, which the boys used to try to cover the holes in the ceiling. Despite Hitoshi's pleading not to, Dabi would use his self-destructive quirk in the clearing near their home to make a fire that they could cook over and keep warm. Hitoshi had only been a thin boy. Living the way he was did not help him with putting on weight. He would shiver violently at night, even sharing a sleeping bag with his older brother. The morning of November 10th, Dobby decided enough was enough.
Come on, let's go to the library. And while you study, I'll see about getting us some warm clothes. Maybe I can figure out how to insulate the walls.
The two carefully packed up their belongings to store in the treehouse. Hitoshi climbed down first, jumping the final few feet to the ground. Dobby thumped down next to him, whipping off as much dirt as possible. Hitoshi couldn't help but mutter, "Maybe we need to get some more wipes, too." Dobby chuckled and ruffled his messy hair, receiving a squawk of disapproval from the kid. They went to the library, warm air washing over them and bringing a flush to the lavender-haired kid's face. Dobby set him up in a corner at a computer. He had enrolled in an online elementary school, and on the days they were able to go to the library, he would work as far ahead as he could. Dobby squeezed Hitoshi's shoulder.
I'm off. I should be back to pick you up around dinner time, okay?
The boy nodded, eyes riveted on the screen in front of him. Shadows grew as the hours passed. Hitoshi had brought a granola bar with him for his lunch. He broke up the time with stretches and pacing the library, smiling at the kindly old woman behind the desk. He would glance at the clock as the sky darkened. A frown graced his face. His brother still hadn't returned. He didn't leave until the librarian sadly informed him that the building would be closing soon. Hitoshi bundled up the best he could, mind racing with thoughts of what may have happened to his brother. Fear engulfed his stomach, the hunger he had felt earlier drifting away with the unknown. Hitoshi anxiously looked around him as he slowly made his way back to their home. Unfortunately, a small, unattended child made an easy victim, and Hitoshi was forced to use his quirk to defend himself. Still, a 6-year-old boy against 2 adult men was not a match. The boy shrieked and thrashed, doing his best to avoid being taken. A dark figure swang down from one of the rooftops, kicking one of the attackers away from the boy. He landed in front of an awe-struck Hitoshi, hair raised and capture weapon moving as he worked to dispose of the 2 villains. It seemed like no time at all before he had them bound. Still in shock, it took Eraserhead calling the police for him to realize that he couldn't still be here. If the police had him, he would go into the system and never get to see his brother again. The boys were curled up in the shared sleeping bag, a cold air whistling through the cracks of the structure. Dobby, do you think I can be a hero? You could. Not sure why you want to. Dobby had not concealed his dislike for heroes. I want to help people like us. Heroes don't help people like us. Some do. Eraserhead does. Eraserhead? He's so cool, Dobby. He doesn't like attention and fights in the bad areas. He leaned up on his arms to look down at his brother's face. All right. He doesn't sound bad. Dobby placated the child. Now can we sleep? He received a humph in return, but the child curled up against him to rest. Thank you, Eraserhead, sir. Hitoshi bowed awkwardly. I'll just be heading home now. His voice raised in pitch with each word, and he moved as quickly as his little body could let him in a fruitless attempt to escape. Kid, I've got a few questions for you. First, are you hurt? He paused, and Hitoshi shook his head, his hair waving like a tree in a strong wind. Okay, good. Second, why are you out here alone? You're far too young. Hitoshi cut in. My brother just got caught up at work, is all. The lie was blatant, and Eraserhead sighed. What's your name, kid? The kid's eyes widened like a deer caught in headlights. How do you know my name? That was clearly the right question, as the boy beamed up at him. Oh, you used to, well, maybe still do, patrol my old neighborhood. You're so cool. He rocked on his heels in excitement. Well, let me walk you home. You need to be safe. Nothing Hitoshi said would dissuade him, and the kid was unsure what to do. Eraserhead knelt down. Kiddo, I want to help you. He took in the way the kid shook, the way his eyes darted around furiously, the way he wrung his hands. Please let me. The universe seemed to make the decision for Hitoshi. His soul marks, his kitten and panther, emerged from his shirt collar and settled below his ear. Eraserhead took in a deep breath at the sight. His own panther and kitten made their way to the palm of his left hand, which he held out for the boy to see. You're... You're... It seems that we're familial soulmates. Aizawa summed up the question in an instant. Will you trust me? But Dobby... Tears pricked at the kid's eyes. Is he your brother? Sort of. We became soulmates after a bit. He was supposed to get me from the library at dinner time, and I'm so worried. The kid rushed into the hero's arms and they encircled him. The man soothed the wild hair and murmured reassurances. When the sobbing slowed, the kid muttered out, Hitoshi. My name's Hitoshi.
Well, Hitoshi, why don't we get your stuff together and stop by the police station?
The kid grew rigid in his arms, but he continued,
To get you paperwork sorted for me to take you home.
Really?
Of course.
Can we get my stuff and maybe write Dobby a note?
Sure thing, kid.
The man lifts the boy in his arms.
Why don't you tell me where we're going?
Shota clutched the young boy to his chest while he quietly directed the man to a dilapidated neighborhood that he recalled Endeavor recently fighting in. The child had him move past the ruins of the houses and into the woods behind. They came across a clearing, and the boy scrambled down in order to climb a tree. Within the branches, Shota was able to discern an old treehouse. The boy tossed down some belongings, and then there was a quiet pause, during which he could only assume the child, Hitoshi, he reminded himself, wrote the note to the older boy that had helped care for him. While waiting, the hero texted his husband, letting him know it was time to bring home one of their children. He grinned into his capture scarf when he received a keyboard smash in response. The boy came down looking a little sullen and picked up the few belongings he had.
Ready to go?
The boy shrugged but held out his hand. His earlier excitement had drained all energy from him. The police station nearest Eraserhead's patrol route was a constantly buzzing hive of activity. Being in the less fortunate side of town meant that they were occasionally processing criminals, from crimes from simple robbery to those that unsettled even the seasoned veterans. For all the hideous things that he had witnessed in his career, he did not envy the poor men and women who had to deal with the never-ending cruelty they witnessed, not to mention the paperwork. The line between criminal activity and villainous occasionally was clear, and though there were plenty of times that Shota would involve himself in criminal activity like he had done earlier that night, it was not part of his job requirement. The hum of the yellowed lights caused goosebumps to break out along Shota's arms. He nodded at the woman who worked the main desk, long since recognizable at this particular station, and made his way back to the office of one agent he worked well with.
Eraserhead, long time no see.
The Aquilian man joked with him.
Officer Tioki, I came across this young man during patrol. We are familial soulmates, likely parental. Well, kiddo, I'm Uyashi Takayaki. What's your name?
Hitoshi Shinso. The boy's whisper was barely audible, but the officer's quirk enhanced his hearing.
Well, it must have been exciting to meet your soulmate, Let's get some paperwork filled out quickly to make sure everything checks out. Then you two can head home and get some rest.
They followed the man into his office and sat behind the desk, feathered fingers flying across the keyboard.
Well, Shinso, it seems like you've had a difficult year.
The boy nodded, and Aizawa raised an eyebrow.
You lost your mother several months ago, and it seems that you were not found by the social workers sent to collect you, though the missing persons report is oddly empty.
They don't like my quirk. The little admission agitated the pro-hero and police officer.
Well, that's wrong on their part. Thankfully, though, you're here, healthy, and officially in the care of Shota Aizawa, pro-hero or Razorhead.
The man's grin somehow came through his beaked mouth.
Is there anything else I'll need to add? My husband, Hazashi Yamada, he also has the soul mark. I'll get that added to the paperwork. You two are free to go. I'll email you the paperwork over the next couple of days for finalization. Thank you, officer. Anytime. You've done so much for us around the precinct. We'll help you out whenever we can.
The two exited the station, still bustling, and were greeted with an enthusiastic yell from a car window. Shota sighed.
Ready to meet my husband. And your other soul parent. He's loud but nice.
Shota placed the child's belongings into the back seat and made sure the kid was buckled up before climbing in the passenger seat.
Hazashi, this is Hitoshi. Hitoshi, this is my husband, Hazashi. Hi there, Hitoshi!
The blonde man flashed a bright smile before starting the car up. He continued to chatter as they drove to the nicer side of town. Hitoshi's eyes were dropping, and every little bit he'd shudder awake. Finally, they pulled into a driveway.
Sweet home!
The man announced in English. They plooted into the house and were met by a chorus of meows. Aizawa worked to push back the critters while Hazashi carried in Hitoshi's luggage. The boy was quiet as he took in the cozy home.
It isn't too large, but we do have a room for you.
Hitoshi followed him down the hall and to a sparsely furnished room.
We don't have much right now, but we can go to the store and get what you need tomorrow. If you want to take a bath, the bathroom is just down the hall.
The boy nodded and yawned, blushing at the sign of exhaustion.
You're also welcome to just go to bed now. Though, are you hungry?
The boy shook his head and glanced at the bed.
You won't bother us a bit.
He ruffled his hair and left the door cracked as he slipped out to join his husband in the kitchen for a mug of tea.
How you holding up, Sho?
Thin arms embraced him. Tension fled his body.
It's a lot to take in. He was living in a treehouse in the neighborhood that Endeavor raised recently.
The blonde let out a curse.
His mother died several months ago. Apparently, he met a teen while living on the streets, and that teen was taking care of him, but I guess he never showed tonight to pick him up. Hitoshi was being cornered by a couple of adults when I found him. Zashi, what if I hadn't been there? What if we lost our kitten?
But you were there, and we didn't.
You found our kitten and brought him home.
He kissed the man's forehead.
let's not focus on what could have been and be grateful for what is.
The two separated to finish their tea in silence. Shota washed the two mugs before Hazashi pulled him by his hand to their bedroom so that they could finally rest. Inko smoothed down the apron she wore. She was finally starting at a new job after months of her hard work getting her CNA. The building was designed for long-term care and had people from a variety of backgrounds. She glanced down at the list she'd been given of the patients she would be focusing on. Scrolled across the page were 6 names with a brief description of their ailments. The first had been victim of a quirk attack and was learning how to manage the effects that had left her with an inability to form words or write correctly after being partially turned into an animal. The others were more traditional patients, with 2 having severe cases of dementia and one woman who had had a rather severe surgery and would require months of rehabilitation before being able to function on her own. The last woman on her list, Rei Todoroki, was listed as having had a mental breakdown leading to the harm of others. The name rang a bell in her mind, but she couldn't quite figure out where she had heard it from. Regardless, it was time for her to introduce herself to the woman she'd be helping care for. Inko was pleasantly surprised at how kind her patients were. They had varying levels of needs, but she felt quite content with her workload. Plus, she mused, she may have made a new friend. She had schooled her shock at the youth of Rei Todoroki, but the quiet woman and she had a conversation about children. It turned out that the white-haired woman had 4 of her own, one of whom was Izuku's age. The woman had proudly shown off her children's soul animals. The woman had a lot of restrictions on her file, particularly avoiding discussions of heroes. That would have been less of an issue if she had had any meaningful conversations outside the topic in the last few years. Given her restrictions, Inko and Ray decided it would be nice to read books and talk about those, as well as completing puzzles. One of her goals was to be able to build social skills, something that had diminished greatly over the last 10 or so years, and given her ultimate goal of independence, it was the area that Inko was supposed to focus on. Inko settled into a routine quickly. Her mornings were spent greeting each patient before assisting Akiri with getting ready for the day. The woman was making progress with adjusting to her claws, but still struggled with aspects of washing and dressing, not to mention feeding herself with utensils. Inko then would check in with her dementia patients and make sure they were completing their morning routines, along with overseeing them take their medications. Inko had always been a firm believer in the healing power of the outdoors. Each late morning or early afternoon, she would take half of her patients either to the courtyard off the square building which contained a vegetable garden, or up to the rooftop gardens, where they could look out over the city while surrounded by flowers and trees. This morning, Inko had her two dementia patients and Ray with her on the rooftop gardens. A chilling wind swept over them, and the tiny woman tightened her shawl around her, checking to ensure that her patients were okay. The two older women had been bundled up fairly well before they left, wearing hats and scarves with their jackets. In a way, Inko supposed the weight she'd gained over the last few years contributed to her ability to get away a cardigan and shawl. Then, of course, there was Ray. The silver-haired woman delighted in the cooling air, a slight smile gracing her face. She wore a sweater and jeans, having reminded her companion earlier that she had a significant resistance to cold temperatures. She had punctuated this by using her quirk to make a small ice butterfly, leaving Inko to laugh at her antics. Yuki, dear, why don't you come see this flower? It matches your eyes. Inko called over to her patient, who had begun to wander away from their little group. Although she couldn't go anywhere really, it made Inko feel better to have the woman nearby. Her appeal worked, and she tucked the flower into the woman's graying hair. Beautiful! Ray complimented her as well, bringing a smile to Inko's round face. The woman wandered around the rooftop, pausing at the different plants intermittently until lunchtime. That evening, Inko busied herself with cooking dinner. She grinned as her son insisted on helping, and she let him to wash the vegetables before she chopped them to add to their meal. The boy rambled about his day, glancing up at her for approval every now and then. She wished she could introduce her sweet boy to Ray, whose animal had recently appeared on Inko's skin. However, she also knew that it could be detrimental to the woman's health, since she was still grieving the lost relationship with her own children. That is the end of Chapter 2 of Soulful Menagerie by Chocolate Castle in the Sky on AO3. If you like this, please go support the original author. Link in the description down below. I hope you like this really long chapter. Hope you have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, kittens, and Happy New Year.